rivalry born in rage, a brotherhood shattered before it had the chance to grow, and for more than 4 decades, a silence that echoed louder than any guitar riff ever played on stage. For fans of heavy metal, the story of Metallica and Megadeth has always felt larger than life. 2 bands that helped shape the very DNA of thrash metal, yet forever tied together by a fracture that began in the early 1980s. At the center of that fracture were 2 men, James Hetfield and Dave Mustaine. One became the voice of the biggest metal band in history. The other built a rival empire fueled by anger, pride, and unfinished business. For years, the world heard only fragments of the truth, interviews filled with half-answers, jabs disguised as jokes, silence where honesty should have been. But now, at 61 years old, James Hetfield is speaking with perspective that only time can create. And what he reveals about Dave Mustaine, about Megadeth, and about the moment that changed both their lives forever is far more complicated than the rivalry fans think they understand. Because this was never just a feud between bands. It was the story of brotherhood that collapsed, and the fire it ignited inside 2 musicians who would go on to reshape heavy metal forever. And it all began in the chaos of the early 80s. Back then, heavy metal was still evolving, mutating from the thunder of Black Sabbath and the speed of Motorhead into something faster, sharper, and more aggressive. In garages and rehearsal rooms across California, young musicians were pushing guitars to their limits. Among them were 2 ambitious outsiders. James Hetfield was a quiet but intense songwriter, a young man carrying a complicated past and a relentless work ethic. His partner in this new musical experiment was Lars Ulrich, a Danish drummer obsessed with creating something that could redefine the genre. Together, they began building what would eventually become Metallica. But in those early days, the band was still searching for an identity. They had ambition, they had hunger, but they needed a spark. That spark arrived in the form of Dave Mustaine. Mustaine wasn't just another guitarist. He was explosive, a whirlwind of talent and chaos wrapped into one unpredictable personality. His playing was aggressive, razor-sharp, and technically fearless. When he joined the group, the chemistry was immediate. Suddenly the music had teeth. Songs like The Four Horsemen and Jump in the Fire carried the fingerprints of his ferocious style. His riffs injected danger into the band's sound. In many ways, the earliest version of Metallica was shaped by that volatile energy. But brilliance can come with a cost. From the very beginning, Mustaine's personality created tension. His drinking spiraled quickly. Arguments erupted during rehearsals. Fights broke out on the road. Crew members were pushed, insulted, and sometimes threatened. Inside the band's cramped touring vans and chaotic rehearsal spaces, the atmosphere began to feel like a pressure cooker. Hetfield and Ulrich admired Mustaine's musical ability. There was no denying how much he brought to the sound. But they also feared that his behavior could destroy everything they were trying to build. And eventually, the tension exploded. One incident became the breaking point. When Mustaine's dog damaged bassist Ron McGovney's car, an argument erupted between band members. Words were exchanged, tempers flared, and in the middle of the chaos, Mustaine lashed out physically. The moment changed everything. Suddenly the band had to confront a brutal reality. They were on the verge of recording their first album, Kill 'Em All. The future of Metallica was finally taking shape, but the person who had helped ignite that sound had become a threat to the band's survival. So Hetfield and Ulrich made the hardest decision of their young careers. Without warning, without discussion, they fired Dave Mustaine. In the early morning hours, they put him on a Greyhound bus headed back to Los Angeles. No farewell tour. No emotional closure, just a long ride home and the crushing realization that the band he helped start was moving forward without him. For Mustaine, the betrayal cut deeper than anyone realized. Years later, he would describe it as the most devastating moment of his life. He had poured his energy, his creativity, and his identity into Metallica. To be thrown out just days before their first album felt like being erased from history. As the bus rolled through the desert toward California, something began forming in his mind. If Metallica wanted to move on without him, he would build something even stronger. That determination became Megadeth. Unlike Metallica, which began slowly expanding its sound and experimenting with structure, Megadeth was born out of pure fury. Every riff Mustaine wrote carried the sting of betrayal. Every lyric felt like a declaration of war. In 1985, that rage exploded into the world with Megadeth's debut album, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. It was fast, chaotic, and brutally technical. Critics didn't hear the sound of a band trying to find its identity. They heard the sound of someone trying to prove a point. One track in particular made the message unmistakable. Mechanics. The song was a faster, more aggressive reworking of The Four Horsemen, a Metallica track Mustaine had helped write before his dismissal. By reclaiming the riff and pushing to new extremes, Mustaine was making a statement to the world. He hadn't disappeared. He was back, and he was angry. While Mustaine poured his frustration into Megadeth's music, Metallica was evolving in a different direction. With guitarist Kirk Hammett replacing Mustaine, the band refined its sound. Their second album, Ride the Lightning, revealed a dramatic leap in songwriting complexity. The riffs were tighter, the themes darker. Then came Master of Puppets in 1986. For many fans and critics, it remains one of the greatest heavy metal albums ever recorded. Songs like Battery, Welcome Home, Sanitarium, and the title track showcase a band reaching new artistic heights. Metallica wasn't just surviving without Mustaine. They were thriving. But the shadow of that early split never disappeared. In interviews, Mustaine frequently criticized Metallica. He called them sellouts. He mocked their lyrics. He questioned their authenticity. The media loved it. Every comment fueled the narrative of a bitter rivalry between the two bands. Headlines framed the conflict as a battle for the soul of thrash metal. And for a long time, fans believed they had to choose sides. On one side stood Metallica, the band that had broken through to the mainstream. Their music evolved, adding melody and emotion, while still retaining the aggression that defined their early sound. On the other side stood Megadeth, fiercely technical and unapologetically intense. Mustaine's songwriting pushed boundaries of speed and complexity that few bands could match. The rivalry became part of metal culture itself. But inside Metallica, James Hetfield rarely engaged in public attacks. Instead, he focused on something else entirely: work. While Mustaine spoke openly about his anger, Hetfield internalized his emotions. The competition became a silent motivator. If Mustaine wanted to prove he had been wronged, Metallica would prove they had made the right decision. Album after album, they pushed forward, and Justice for All expanded their musical ambition. Then came the Black Album in 1991, transforming Metallica into a global phenomenon. Songs like Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters carried heavy metal into arenas, radio stations, and living rooms around the world. But success didn't erase the past. Deep down, Hetfield still carried the weight of that decision from 1983. And eventually, fate forced the two men to confront it. In 2004, Metallica released a documentary called Some Kind of Monster. The film captured the band during one of the most turbulent periods of their career as they struggled with internal conflict and personal demons. In the middle of that documentary, something extraordinary happened. Dave Mustaine walked into a room to meet James Hetfield face to face. For the first time in more than 20 years, they sat across from each other. The moment was raw. Mustaine, once the aggressive voice of countless interviews, appeared deeply vulnerable. The anger that had fueled his career was still there, but underneath it was something else. Pain. He told Hetfield how deeply the firing had hurt him, how the band had never truly acknowledged his contributions, how he felt erased from the legacy they built. "You never even said thank you," he told him. For a moment, the rivalry disappeared. What remained were two men confronting the emotional wreckage of their shared history. Hetfield didn't argue. He didn't dismiss Mustaine's feelings. Instead, he admitted something that fans had rarely heard from before. He felt remorse. Back then, the band had been young, reckless, and struggling to survive. The decision to fire Mustaine wasn't meant as personal revenge. It was desperation. But that explanation didn't erase the years of resentment between them. The conversation ended without a dramatic reconciliation. There were no hugs, no promises of collaboration. But something had shifted. For the first time, fans saw the truth behind the legend. Not just rivals, not just rock stars, but two people still try to understand a moment that changed their lives forever. Years passed. Both bands continued touring. releasing music, and shaping the history of metal. And occasionally, the idea of a reunion resurfaced. What if Hetfield and Mustaine worked together again? In interviews during the early 2020s, Mustaine hinted that discussions had taken place behind the scenes. The idea was simple but powerful. Revisit some of the early songs they had written together and rework them as a collaboration. For fans, it would have been historic. Two of thrash metal's founding architects returning to the music that started everything. For a brief moment, it seemed possible. Then the conversation reached a familiar obstacle: publishing rights. Mustaine believed he had never been properly credited for certain contributions to early Metallica songs. When the topic came up during discussions with Hetfield, the atmosphere shifted. The project collapsed almost immediately. No argument. No dramatic confrontation. Just silence. Later, Mustaine summarized a moment with a quiet sense of disappointment. Once I brought that up, it was over. The opportunity vanished. For fans, it felt like history repeating itself. But even now, decades after the original split, James Hetfield speaks about Mustaine with a level of respect that wasn't always present in the past. He acknowledges Mustaine's influence on early Metallica. He recognizes a talent that helped ignite their sound. And perhaps most importantly, he understands something that only time can teach. Rivalries may define careers, but they don't always define the truth. Because without Dave Mustaine, Metallica might not have developed the edge that made them legendary. And without being fired from Metallica, Megadeth might never have existed. Two bands, two legacies, both born from the same chaotic beginning. And somewhere in that tangled history lies one of heavy metal's greatest unanswered questions. What would have happened if they had stayed together? Maybe the music would have been even more explosive. Maybe the band would have collapsed under the weight of competing egos. Or maybe the rivalry itself was the very thing that pushed them to greatness. After all, some fires don't destroy everything they touch. Sometimes they forge legends.